Welcome to Versus. This is Spencer. Today's games we have Bruges by Stefan Feld and Lewis and Clark, The Expedition by Cedric Shabusi, both of which are excellent games that I enjoy quite a bit. First, let's talk about Bruges. The story behind Bruges is you are prominent noblemen in the city of Bruges, which I believe is Belgium. You are trying to recruit different characters to come be a part of your group, and you're scoring points. The story behind this doesn't integrate too incredibly well with the rules, but the rules themselves are really fun to play. Lots of good mechanisms in this game. The cards that come with it are both colored on the back and also have characters on the front. So they're dual-purpose cards, which really makes for some interesting gameplay. There are 5 different colors. You have brown, purple, red, blue, and yellow. And the first part of the game is what you're going to be doing is filling your hands from these card decks. And you can choose from either deck, either the right or the left. When you choose, you can see the backs of the cards, but you cannot see the fronts. So you can tell that this is going to be a red card and this is going to be a brown card, but you don't necessarily know what's going to be on the other side. So in this case, we have a falconer, but when you pick it, when you choose this card, you only know that it's brown. You don't know exactly what the character will be. So let's take a closer look at the card. On the right side, you see this ribbon of information that tells you what you can do with this card. And the first 5 things you can do with the card have nothing to do with the character itself. It has to do with what's on the back of the card. In this case, again, this is a brown card. So this card can be used to, number 1, you can discard this card to pick up 2 brown workers. Here there's different workers that match all the colors of the cards. So you can discard the card to pick up 2 brown workers. You can turn in the card for some money, which I'll show later. You can turn in the card to discard a certain type of travesty or different plague that will come. You can use the card to build the canals. So around the perimeter of the board, there's these different spaces to build canal pieces. So you can build on a brown canal. In this case, the blue player can only first play on a blue canal or a yellow canal, but eventually they might get to a brown one and they could use this card to build on a brown canal space. They can also use this card to simply play it in front of them in a tableau fashion and paying a worker to build this card, and then it becomes a building. So on this building, you can then, in the future, characters can come reside in the building, and this is where the last benefit of the card or use of the card is by actually paying a certain price to put the character in a building in front of you in your tableau. So eventually during the game, you're going to play cards to have these different characters that come out in front of you. It also uses dice to determine which plagues everyone gets. There's different events, whether it be a flood maybe or fire, and there's different things that happen. You have to prepare for those events. You can move up in this track here. You can also get money, as I mentioned earlier. In this case, when these dice are rolled, if I were to discard this card for money, I would look at the brown dice, since this is a brown card, and take that much money. So there's a lot of different interaction going on, which is typical Stefan Feld. There's a lot of ways to score points. You have to kind of mitigate certain problems that might arise by discarding things. But it also has this interesting element that the backs of the cards are used for one thing, and the fronts of the cards are used for another thing. It has a certain tactical feel, which I'll talk about more later, but it's a really interesting, good game for 2 to 4 players. Lewis and Clark has a very obvious theme. This is a historical game based on the fact that the Lewis and Clark expedition in the early 19th century set out to find a passageway up the Missouri River, through the mountains, all the way up to the Pacific coast. So in this game, you start in St. Louis, and it's a race. The first one to set up camp past Fort Clatsop up in Oregon. The first one to set up camp past the flag wins the game, regardless of where the other players are along the trail. There is a river you go through. There are mountains you pass through, more river, etc. And in this game, you also have cards. So this represents the player board. Everyone starts with a certain number of resources that they can place on their river board. There's also a resource of Native Americans. So these Native Americans can go in different canoes that are part of your exploration party. There's also other boats where you can place resources. There's 4 primary resources here. There are food. This is referred to as equipment, wood and fur or skins. And then there's secondary resources that you can obtain during the game, such as canoes and horses. Canoes and food help you move down the river, or I guess in this case, up the river. And horses help you pass through mountains. Everyone starts with the same set of cards, well, the same abilities on their cards, although the characters are different. The characters in the starting hand don't matter as much other than to give some flavor to it. But in this game, let's say you wanted to gather wood. You would play a card that lets you get wood. However, a card can never be played by itself. The backs of the cards also have information that help your gameplay. So in this case, a card by itself, as I mentioned, cannot be played by itself. You have to play another card to power that card. So if I wanted to gather wood, I would have to play a card next to it to power it with the value of 1. Or I could add Indians to that card in order to boost the power. So in this case, it would be a power of 2. Or thirdly, I could instead not power it with another card and power it simply with a Native American. So really this gives dual purpose to the cards. The backs of the cards are used to power cards. There's also ways that you can obtain more cards. So here during your turn, you can purchase new cards, which are different historical characters that will come out. For example, this card helps you get either equipment or wood. Or maybe this card right here helps you move through the mountains if you pay 3 skins or 3 furs, which are the yellow resource. So during the game, you're going to obtain more of these characters. You're also going to have places here on the board that you can play. During your turn, one of your available actions could be to send a Native American out to help you in different actions, maybe to gather specific resources, build canoes, obtain horses, etc. So in the end, as I mentioned, you're trying to build up kind of this engine using both sides of the cards, and you can get along this path trying to reach the end. Comparisons are some of which are pretty obvious, the most of which is the fact that the cards have 2 sides and both sides are used. So in Bruges, one side is used based on the color, and in Lewis and Clark, the back sides of the cards are used to power other cards, which I believe is unique in both situations. Another comparison is a little bit of engine building. So as you build these characters, they will generate off of each other. They will maybe be symbiotic, and you can chain actions together. It's a little bit similar in Lewis and Clark. Based on the cards that you purchase or characters that you come recruit to be part of your expedition, they can work together. And that's essentially kind of where the comparison stops. There's so much different. Lewis and Clark is much more strategic and deep and long. Bruges is a bit lighter, a bit more tactical. You're going to pick 5 cards every round, and you're just going to use cards every round. Whereas in Lewis and Clark, it's much more strategic and long. The game kind of has a longer end game where you have to plan ahead. So kind of which game is better? Well, it depends on what you like. Do you want a game that's a little bit more quick and tactical and maybe a little bit easier to introduce? Then Bruges is your bet. If you like a game that's a little longer, more strategic, and a little bit more difficult to understand, but still really engaging and really rewarding, then Lewis and Clark is your game. In my case, I really enjoy both. Sometimes I want something quick, but sometimes I want something deep. And in that regard, I heartily recommend both. Thanks. Have a good one.